I am very pleased to be able to speak with you about the topic is doing theology in the 21st century. I will do it by looking at maybe also from autobiographical perspective. You may want to know who I am, why I entered theology, and what I have been doing theology in the last maybe 50 years. But I also focus on not only on autobiography, but also in the discipline we call theology. What is it? What do you mean by theology? Who is a theologian? And what you do today in the 21st century? All right, let me begin with a few autobiographical remarks. You can tell from my name is that I am not an American born as such. It's Peter Phan, not Peter Pan that most people used to say, right? It's a Vietnamese name. I am a Vietnamese American. I came to the United States in 1975. If you old enough, you remember the war, the so-called Vietnam War that ended in 1975 with the victory of the communist North over the more or less democratic South. So my family and myself left Vietnam in the last day of the war in April the 30th of 1975. And we picked up and we went to Guam for a week. And from Guam, we went to Southern California, Camp Pendleton. And as I was watching the Afghanistan being lifted out of Afghanistan, it reminded me of what happened almost 50 years ago, dramatically. So that is who I am. And I am now, as Danielle said, I am teaching at Georgetown University, where I came in 2003. Before that, I taught across the street in East Washington, D.C., at the Catholic University for 15 years. So I have been teaching more or less about 50 years. That's a long, long time. I deserve a well-deserved retirement very soon. As far as my theological formation is concerned, it's very interesting that I took a degree in theology as part of the formation for the priesthood. I never considered theology as a quote-unquote career. You never. We think of when I came back to Vietnam in 1972, I was working more in ministry and occasionally teaching a course or two, but mostly I never thought of teaching until I came to this country. Theology then became a kind of necessary work for me to support my parents and my family, brothers, sisters, and so forth. Now, I studied in Rome in 1968 to 1972. Now, if you remember that, 4 years, and it was right after the council. The council ended, Vatican II started in 1962 and ended in 1965. The changes that Vatican II mandated in terms of theology and formation and so forth had not yet taken place. It was talked about, but it's not yet taken place. It's a kind of trickle down, kind of slowly. But for my training, I was trained, as most of you may suspect, in very classical theology, mostly Western theology. We read Augustine, Thomas Aquinas, and those were the texts that we read. So when I finished my theology, I came back to Vietnam, and the first challenge for me, which I will speak at greater length later, is how to talk to people. The theology that I learned for 4 years seemed to be totally irrelevant to people. I wrote dissertation and all that, but for me to talk to people how theology is something relevant, something that contributes to their formation, their spiritual life and their Christian life, it's very difficult. And the categories, the kind of thinking that we learn in theology in Rome is totally, I realized at the time, totally irrelevant to people. And so the first challenge for me then at the time is how to translate, not simply translate into Vietnamese, which is also very, very necessary because we lack the language, the vocabularies to do theology, but translating in terms of cultural transposition to speak from a Western perspective, which I have learned, to the Vietnamese and a broader, the Asian categories and cultural categories and so forth. So that is the first challenge. As I said, I will speak at great length later. Then when I arrived in the United States, we are confronted with a different cultural context. Of course, it is still Western, but we were entering the post-Vatican II era, the aftermath. And then you see from 1975 on, there's so many changes that literally shock a lot of people. People were used to Latin Mass and so forth, and now in the vernacular. And the life in the parish, usually it was simply dominated by the priest, the pastor, and now the lay people involved, many in terms of religious education from the 1975 to today. We know that without the laity engaged in administration, in religious education, in music, in pastoral ministry, the American parish would have simply died off, because without them, there's the loss of religious vocations. A lot of sisters have abandoned and no more religious vocation. You used to have every year, you have 20, 30 novices. Now you're lucky to get one or two. Seminaries were closing down because there were not enough priests and so forth. So there was a kind of a very great turbulent period. People looking back and wonder what kind of church we are going. But then the second challenge for me as a theologian now, one who teaches theology, is how to translate, again, not simply English, but translate culturally the language into the American culture, which is quite different from European culture, even though they share quite a bit, okay? I taught first at the University of Dallas. It is a small Catholic liberal arts college in Dallas, Texas. And then I moved to Catholic University, which is much larger graduate school and focused very much on the training of seminarians. I taught a lot of seminarians. And so it's a very much Catholic theology, the focus on Catholic theology. When I moved to Georgetown, the environment is totally different. It's night and day. There's people, students are mostly lay, 90% lay. There are no seminary attached to Georgetown. And teaching students that are not Catholic, not even Christian, a lot of Muslims, a lot of Buddhists and so forth. They are not, at Catholic University, 95% of students are white. At Georgetown, you have just a difference, the variety of ethnic background, racial background, and then the different kind of religious background. The Catholic students at Georgetown are not trained to be ministers and so forth. So there you have another environment, a cultural environment, translating Christian theology into a very different non-Catholic and even non-Christian, right? Non-Christian context. So I am talking so far of the need to translate Christian theology into cultures. The technical term for that is inculturation, which is mostly Catholic term. Protestants use the term contextualization, just similar but different languages. Inculturation for Catholics. The second task that challenges us very, very much is the questions of relation with non-Christian religions, which is very strong at Georgetown, not so much at the University of Dallas, nor at Catholic University of America. At Georgetown, you have the Center of Christian-Muslim Understandings. You have so many initiatives in the inter-religious dialogue. When I came to Georgetown in 2003, I was given the mandate to found a doctoral program in theology. And the question is, what is the focus of this? And I chose to focus on, for the program, on inter-religious thinking, a kind of comparative theology. Doctoral students must know at least two religious traditions. Some of them chose Islam, many Islam, and Christian theology, but there's also Christianity and Buddhism, Christianity and Judaism, and so forth. So this is the second challenge for me, is inter-religious dialogue. All right, so far so good. Inculturation, interreligious dialogue. There's the third challenge. What is the third challenge? As I travel around the world, mostly giving lectures and so forth, mostly in Asia, a lot in Europe, and some also in Latin America, in Mexico, in Brazil. The one thing that struck me the most is the poverty, the extreme poverty of people coming from the United States, living in the United States. We take for granted certain things: clean air, clean water, drinking water. Such a thing cannot be taken for granted. When you go to India, you go to China, and you go to Vietnam, many other countries in Asia, clean air is not something that you can assume. Drinkable water is not something you can assume. And the lack of education, the lack of health care, the lack of the basic minimum. So I was introduced, I remember very well, I came back from India, New Delhi. I was so depressed because when I came back to the United States, I asked myself, how can billions of people live off on less than $1 a day? Whereas this country, we can throw things away, throw food away, and with Pope Francis called the term is the throwaway culture. So there are three things: extreme poverty, cultural differences, and religious pluralism. Those have been and will be my concern for theology.